There's always this constant change happening in the international fora that it's so difficult to keep track of what's happening individually with the countries. So you can imagine the different countries as a classroom, and the different countries as playing different roles in that same class. So as children we see we evolve every day, so do nations. But what's interesting to see is how this organization takes a decision that is then taken up by everyone in the class. So we're going to discuss this concept of consensus. Before I move into the concept of consensus, I'm touching upon this concept called sovereign equality. Now, each nation, when it comes to the United Nations, has equality towards their vote as far as the General Assembly and its allied bodies are concerned. So, irrespective of the size of the nation, the population, or economic resources, at the end of the day, we follow the concept of sovereign equality as far as the General Assembly is concerned. So, however affluent or not so affluent a nation may be, they all have an equal say as far as decision making is concerned for the General Assembly. Now, can anybody think of problems that might come up because of this concept? Because each member state gets an equal right to vote. So, can somebody think of a downside to such a concept? You may choose to unmute. Right, so I'll just probably just give one example to you. Okay, so there may be some nations that might be contributing towards the budgetary resources of the UN, but there might be more nations who might be requiring those funds. So there's always a possibility that the decision-making power gets so diluted at the end of the day that member states that might have the economic resources to contribute towards the UN's budget might not be the nations who would drive the decision-making process. Now, before the UN came into existence, there was this unanimity rule whereby a decision was to be accepted only if all member states accept the decision. So, contrary to a majority decision-making process, the League of Nations followed a concept of unanimity, which meant every member state had to agree to the decision. And if there's a single member that does not agree, that decision does not go through. This led to a problem. And that's one of the reasons that we found ourselves unable to stop the Second World War, was member states were so bound by this unanimity rule that even a single member not agreeing to a certain decision always led to going back to the negotiation table. And this made the very concept of an international body very weak. They were unable to come to any sort of consensus on a decision. And simply because one or two member states would always disagree to the point, at the end of the day, this international body could not take a lot of decisions. Now, coming to the United Nations as a concept, you must be all aware that it's formed in 1945, and the initial 51 members were the ones that signed the UN Charter as well. And does anyone want to take a go at what are the 6 main organs of the United Nations? Again, you can just unmute and tell us the remaining five. Okay, we can see that the General Assembly is listed here.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. I hear two voices, but between yourselves, you can choose.
So the main organs of the U.S. are the Secretariat, the Economic and Social Council, the Security Council, the International Court, the Trustship Council, and the General Assembly.
That is correct. Okay, we have a correct answer in the first go. Congratulations. So out of these six bodies or organs of the United Nations, five of them are active. The Trusteeship Council is not so active at this point because it formed with the specific purpose of helping out the colonies emerging out of the Second World War, restore balance and uh, political foundations for those nations which were just released as colonies. So, since that target has been achieved by the United Nations, it's not a very active organ at this point. But the remaining five, as have been correctly noted by your fellow here, they are extremely crucial to how the UN functions today. Now, discussing more on the General Assembly itself, it's the largest body within the United Nations because it encompasses all people who are members of the UN. So every member state is a part of the UN General Assembly. So, say for other organs like the Security Council or the ECOSOC, that there could be a situation where you become a member only on a rotational basis. So those decisions are made basis your geographic location. So there are times when a certain nation might become part of those organs, but as far as the General Assembly is concerned, every member is always a part. It follows the concept of sovereign equality, that is, each member state has one vote, and this body is presided by the president of the General Assembly or the PGA, and as you can see, like it takes a lot of decisions every year. Now, coming to the decision making process in itself. So, we follow the concept of simple majority as far as adoption of a resolution is concerned. A simple majority means at least 50% plus one person has to vote in favor of a resolution. So, yes, there is a concept of voting within the UN, but interestingly, most resolutions that are taken up by the General Assembly use the concept of consensus, which was our starting point for this discussion. So, yeah, just as a background, like because the unanimity rule did not work so well in the League of Nations time, the UN decided to go against it and rather focus on a simpler method that is the majority, just to ensure that at least decisions are taken even if some members disagree to them. Now, interestingly, even though all members are only part of the General Assembly, at the end of the day, the General Assembly does not have the power to take up a lot of decisions. So, even though it passes close to three, is the sovereign decision of a nation whether or not to enforce the recommendations of the General Assembly in their country's legislation at the end of the day. So I'm just quoting Article 10 of the UN Charter, which talks about decisions of the General Assembly merely being recommendations to the members of the UN. So we have to understand that as a body, one will have to focus more on making a decision that is acceptable to everyone, so that the decision is given some value. Because if a positive impact is made at the time of decision making and each is happy with the decision, there's a better likelihood of the decision coming through with a positive impact in the local legislation of that country. So when you think of making a decision based out of consensus, we use this example like think of ordering pizza with your friends or family. So like in each social circle there might be different preferences in terms of the toppings to pizza. So the likelihood of a decision being successful when all people agree on certain things, even if they have to make concessions with respect to what they like more. So probably if I have to order a pizza, I might want say olives on my pizza, but I know that my friend is allergic to them. So we both might be okay rather putting jalapenos on the pizza rather than putting olives. So by making those concessions or by making such choices, we both can agree to eat the pizza. And at the same time, we're not leaving out a person completely. Do put those olives on a pizza, probably that one person might not be able to eat at all. So by making small concessions, nations are also able to accommodate certain restrictions for the other nations in order to come at a decision which is mutually acceptable and is more likely to be enforced locally in those countries' legislations. Okay, so I spoke about this part, like what solution. Now, coming to the problems with the majority decision making. So, as I discussed already, if only the majority had to pass a decision, at the end of the day, taking a vote might make the decision a little extreme. So, what voting does is fits you in this one direction. Like you have to slot yourself either in a yes or a no decision making process, which can polarizing outcomes to implementation of any decision organization. So this is one of the discussions by a former foreign affairs minister from Philippines. So the charter tried to balance the unanimity rule in the Security Council with the majority rule in the General Assembly. It created a majority tyranny in the General Assembly. So if you remember, I initially talked about this concept that maybe a few countries might be contributing more towards the budgetary or economic resources of the UN. At the end of the day, if a decision has to come through in the General Assembly, they have to be cognizant of the requirements of all 193 member states. Plus, when we discuss Security Council procedures as well, the General Assembly has a tyranny of the majority, meaning a decision can only come through if the major political powers holding more votes, say like the African lot of member states, and such political groups can at the end of the day lead to successful decision of a resolution. That sort of association does happen in the General Assembly compared to the Security Council, where it's first the decision being accepted and being implemented to the liking of the remaining 10 members of the Security Council. Okay, so we'll hear from the Director General of the ILO as well that voting tends to become a substitute for negotiation rather than a measure of the amount of agreement reached or the final resort when the negotiation fails. So what people are trying to point at, or the simple argument we're trying to make. Coming back, pivoting to the example of the pizza again. Um, if you were to take a vote, say four people are sitting in a room and they're discussing if they to order a pizza. So three people in the room, I think someone might needs to be muted. Okay, great. Thank you. So coming back to that example of the pizza. Okay, let's increase the number of people in the room from four to like 10 people. Now, say only three people in the room are vegetarian and seven are meat eaters, or they enjoy having, say, a chicken or seafood on the pizza. Now, if we go on to vote, what we're essentially doing is we are removing the whole essence of negotiation or coming to consensus on a decision by discussion. Because if you know that you are the majority in the room, you know you can enforce that decision on the entire room. That's the whole concept. It takes away the entire negotiation process because a number count, and nations would follow the procedure to please the bare minimum number of required nations in order to get the resolution through. But the likelihood of such a resolution being implemented in all countries is very less, because the people who did not vote in favor of that resolution might not be inclined to apply that decision or follow that decision in their country. Okay, so what exactly is consensus? We've been talking round and round about taking decisions together. So, as far as decision making in the US is concerned, consensus means the adoption of a decision where no vote is required. So, wherever we think that, okay, we need to vote on a particular resolution, we've already lost out on the concept of consensus. So consensus ends where voting begins. So that's something that's a very key takeaway that you all need to remember when you're participating in a UN for MUN or a YMN related simulation. That the whole idea of consensus is to not vote, because everybody is in agreement as far as the decision is concerned. So if you see this chart, it shows the shift in how resolutions are adopted at the UN. So you'll see that in the initial times, so between 1946 and 1973, 60% of the decisions were being taken by a vote and 40% of the decisions were by consensus. But as we come close to an era of the end of the Cold War, with the breaking up of the Soviet Union and change in the global thinking patterns, you can see a major shift towards making resolution by consensus, and a very limited number of subjects now remain which are taken up by voting, because there are some polarizing views on those topics, and nations would like to get that registered as a vote in support of their decision to do or not to do something with respect to an issue. So today, about 80% of the resolutions are being adopted by consensus in the General Assembly, and this has given a strong global message of unity, because all nations are able to implement these decisions much quickly, and they are also able to accommodate that thinking in their local legislation as well, because at the end, one needs to hold up a decision that they have voted upon or agreed upon at an international forum and explain it to the local population as to why they are in favor of such a decision. And a rather interesting format or an interesting platform to voice any concern or to tell the world that I am agreeing to a decision subject to certain conditions, use of the concept of explanation of position, whereby you tell that you might not be the happiest or the most satisfied with the decision. But at the end of the day, you're not against the decision as well. So it's like saying that I would have wanted olives on my pizza, but I am okay with pizza with jalapenos. So what I'm trying to say is I still want to order the pizza with the jalapenos, but maybe I just want to tell the world as well that olives would have been a better option. So some of the studies you would be simulating for the Model UN as well. So most bodies in the UN follow the consensus approach, and you might have heard of or learned about some of these bodies of the UN when we think of decision making by consensus. So we've talked a lot about the whole consensus process, and frankly, the preparations for a UN General Assembly session start as soon as the previous session ends. So where the nations have about 4 to 6 months to come to a conclusion about a specific resolution, a Model UN simulation is generally a shorter version, which spans from anywhere between 2 to 4 days. So I just want to check with the hosts, how long is our simulation going to be? Like, is it for 2 days or is it for 3 days?
It's for 2 days, sir.
2 days.
Okay. So I'll try to make discuss the flow of debate accordingly, so that we understand how to pace things up in the committee if required. Now, this is the shortened version of the whole process. So what you see is there are just three main elements to decision making at the UN. There's a formal meeting, which is followed by consultations, and then meeting to adopt the decision or the resolution with or without a vote. All right, so you'll see that within the informal consultation segment, there's this new box to the right, which talks about a whole new process of drafting and merging your resolutions. So I'll go step by step and explain each part. I just want to give you a general idea process. So just steps to it. That is a formal meeting in the start, followed by the consultations and a formal end to adopt the resolution. So there must be some unfamiliar terms on this sheet right now, say the line by line review or drafting or merging of